First of all, let's talk about the fact that I missed the first conversation by sleeping through the first conversation, which is funny because Lamar slept through all of World War II. Right?
That actually came up last time. The line was hilarious.
So he slept through all of World War II. I slept through the first conversation, which you guys had, which I apologize. For me, my experience with this book is like from the beginning of the book till when Lamar was like running for governor, I could not hold on to anything.
Not even Gillespie in the winter, dude. Not even him. Like, that's what we talked about all last time, how he tried to, run game on these women and their mothers.
I think my problem is the book before this was Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. After that, I just can't latch on to almost anything because like my expectations like here. And then I started this book and I was like, boom. And I was like, ugh. But I'm glad that I stuck it through because towards the middle, like I said, when Lamar was running for governor, I definitely got much more engaged. And the second half of the book, I was engaged. I kind of understood, like, first there was like running for governor. Second, there was like the whole just society just falling apart and it's just being funny, then being so sad.
Pathetic.
Sad, pathetic, but they're still like, oh, wow. If only they knew that these two amazing people just like drove past them. Like there's like a line somewhere towards the end where like, oh, they don't even know how good we are. The podcast I listened to said that the Coen brothers, if anybody, would be able to take on this book into a movie.
Trey Parker and Matt Stone. I feel like they should do it.
Oh,
I think that Marina is right. I'm sorry, Steve, and I'll tell you the reason why.
I didn't say that. The podcast said it.
Okay, well, then I think that Marina, you're right because because the Coen brothers are going to turn this into like they're gonna make it boring, and I don't think that Charles Portis meant this as like I don't think he meant it to be like a deep metaphor. I think he was like, look at these fucking idiots. They have like they think that they are so amazing based on something that they themselves like they got high on their own supply. Did you say that? I forget. They are the definition. I think you said that last time. It was like brilliant.
Well, not all of them. Like Austin didn't get high off his own supply.
Well, I think he's always been high off his own supply. I think that's the thing with Popper is like that he was born high in his own supply. Like he just spun his own web of nonsense from the very beginning.
But isn't he like a con man?
He is, no, 100%. But I feel like he's, there are clever con men, and then there are like con men that are middle of the road, where it's like a good con man wouldn't get himself out in the middle of like fucking nowhere, Colorado, like growing bagweed with some random schmuck from Romania, coming alcoholic and is having his whole place like covered in bird droppings and like falling asleep in random places. So like I feel like he spins this web, but he's also like at the end, like he's claiming they're going to this like mansion in Texas and they show up, it's a fucking trailer park. Like it's
yeah.
He's a dumbass.
I agree he's not a very good con man, but
he's not bad.
Lamar is the high off your own supply. Like super obvious.
Lamar, yes.
Yeah.
Not only Lamar, like a few, like, I mean, during the heyday of Gnomonism or whatever, it'd probably be the vast majority. And that's I think there is a deep metaphor, and the deep metaphor is organized religion. I think the deep metaphor is, you could say, politics to a certain extent. It's another reminder, like, do not fall into the trap of a cult, whether it's a religious cult, a political cult, or even like your work cult, your job cult, because your job is trying to convince you to be part of this, like, drink your Kool-Aid kind of thing. Anti-work.
It's funny. So I was just re-listening to parts of the book right before this, and something struck me, which ties to your point of like, so there's a point where Popper is in Colorado and he starts drinking, and because everything's being rationed because it's the war, he has to, like, every place has this established rule that like before you get the good whiskey, you have to get 4 shots of the rum. But in this case, what was so interesting is that like he had to like suffer through this rum because he was becoming an alcoholic and he needed to drink something. But then after a while, he started to prefer it. Then he was savoring that, like, the worse the rum was, the more that he was enjoying it. And there's a line that talks about how incredible it is that humans can get used to anything. There's like, no matter how bad your predicament is, you acclimate to it, and then it's like, yeah, this is your new reality now.
In the worst example, it's Stockholm syndrome.
But it's I think that if
when you're like, you like Stockholm because of its architecture, that's the syndrome.
What I was gonna say is, I think that this book, if it had one slogan, it would be adults can be morons too, or something like that. Do you remember that part of the book? I forget. It was like a lengthy part, and I also thought that this book moved really slowly and could lose like a third of it and not lose content. But the part when like there was an entire fucking senatorial hearing, when they're just like, oh, this Lamar Jimmerson of yours, he is certainly a like accusation, and then Popper would be like, he is nothing of the sort, like, and they would be like, oh, indeed, and it's like this, it goes on for pages, and you're like, you guys are like, these are senators, like state senators, but still, I think they're state senators. It's just like, guys, don't you have anything else to debate?
Funny,
but
I started reading this because you started reading it, and you're like, you guys have to read this.
Well, because for sure, because I heard about Portis in a podcast that I listened to.
You liked it in the
And then-
beginning, right?
I wouldn't say that I dislike it. I thought that it was, I wouldn't reread it, but I thought that it was a worthwhile read, because the parts were like laugh out loud funny, like just hilarious. Like me, like the when he got drunk when he invited the woman and her mom over, and he just like passed out, and how he thought Gulescu was Muslim, and then he was like, not even close. And if he were, Gnomonism didn't prohibit Muslims. So he just like, it's just like,
it's nonsense.
Yeah, and all of it is like, why the fuck would you think? But like Gulescu too, he's like, they paint him in a good light when he like gets with these women. I guess he's like more successful than Popper, but he's also like an idiot. Like he's an idiot who lies about everything.
I think Gulescu was honest. I feel like for me, he seemed like he was insane. That was his problem.
Oh, yeah, that's fair.
Lost
Maybe
marbles a long time ago.
this is a good point. This is true. Okay, perhaps. But like he wasn't like everything that he was saying about Moo and all that stuff. Like there's no way. You know what I mean? Like what?
I love it. How everything.
Marina, please talk about the Native American. That was so good.
I love that part. I feel like honestly, I loved it originally, and then when I reread it to you is when I loved it even more. Oh, wait,
it's so good.
All right, fill me in.
So Gulescu obviously is like gung ho about Mu, this ancient city, and he's talking to a Native American, and Gulescu is trying to explain to him that like he's part of this ancient order, that his ancestors were part of it, and that he's just sort of a degraded species of it. And this guy, has a legit job and everything. He's like, did you just call me degraded? And Gulescu's trying to explain, they had these ancient tongues, but, I don't mean physical tongues. And then he like stuck out his tongue, trying to point like, not my physical tongue. So he tried to dumb down the conversation to this regular man who, first of all, he called degraded. And second of all, he's now talking to like he's an imbecile. And it's just...
You see, this is why I think the book, well, I don't know what the problem is. I don't know if the problem is me or the book, because like half the book, I felt like
every religious person asks that question at some point, my man.
No, I felt like I was in high school. Like in high school, I was not able to like latch onto books well. So I'm not sure if it was like my comprehension issues or the book was just not really easy to follow along.
I mean, it wasn't linear. But it did bounce around. My problem with it was that it was just like, there would be parts that were unreadable. I would be like, why am I learning about like everything that they ate and like the boarding part? I get that they were like disagreeable. Like there was a part when it was just really boring too.
Yeah, that's the first half of the novel for me. Was so
I disagree. I would say it's about a third.
I don't know. I really liked it. I read it. I don't know. I slowed down multiple times because I didn't want to read it too fast, because I was ready to read it like in one sitting. Also, I do feel like this is the kind of book that it would be a lot funnier if it's read with people and not just like at the end, but sort of like in portions so that you discuss it. Because I feel like the absurdity of it doesn't really hit until you talk to someone else about it.
If somebody good took it and adapted it for like a mini series, maybe like it would kill.
Yeah.
Apparently, he is very underrepresented in curricula around the country because, like, I've never heard of him until like 2 years ago.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah.
So, and I think he's a decent enough author to be read. So I guess, do you see any reasons why specific, based on these two books, I guess, or this one book, why he would specifically be like not in curricula?
Maybe because it's like structurally unsound. In that same podcast, they said it's not really a book. It's more like 10 vignettes or something. So it doesn't have like a very strong plot until the middle.
I had the easiest time following this book. I don't know what it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I have to say, I must agree with Steve here.
Yeah.
I had a hard time following it.
I don't know. Like it was like the only times I get confused is when there are too many names thrown at me. And there were points when there were too many names and I was like, just slow it down. But besides that, it was just very like time stamped in terms of like this happened next and this happened next. And it just went in a very simple direction.
I think with this book, I think a lot of people have made the argument that it's not exactly good art from like, I guess, the structural perspective, but also just like it's a little nonsensical, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's meant to be kind of nonsensical in the sense of like what the characters are doing are nonsensical, but there's a point to the nonsense, kind of. As in, like, that's the kind of the point is to satirize these people.
Yeah, it does it the whole time.
Right. The whole thing is a satire. Everything that's happening is to make fun of them.
It's like it's pointing at them and saying, look, you see, their madness runs deep. Like they believe this wrong. Because like I think that like Gillespie, like you were saying, he believes in Mu.
Right.
And like if you think about the time when it's taking place, simultaneously he's telling this Native American, you are degraded, but also simultaneously at the same time you are also the descendant of this great superhuman thing. This is right after World War II, right? So the entire world, and eugenics, by the way, started in the US and like elsewhere, and it was like deeply scientific for like, and they fought an entire war to disprove that essentially. But before that war, like everybody was measuring skulls everywhere. Like that was just common practice. That was good hygiene, as they say. You know what I mean? And like that got disproven within like 3 decades, and millions of people had to die. So it's pointing at these people and saying, look at these fucking loons. They are so deeply insane, and you're listening to these people. Like you could be following this guy.
I think there's a conspiracy to this book not being so popular. You think it's like shut down by the NSA, CIA, FBI? They're like,
no, there's no shutdown. No. There's no reason to shut down books. Nobody reads anyway.
There's a couple of moments in the book where I had the feeling that Portis was making fun of this book.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm curious to find out because this is very interesting.
So, page 158, it goes, Gnomon literature was not, after all, that tired old business of a thread to be followed, but more
oh God,
of a bubbling spring of words. It was the page numbers. So I thought he was making fun of the book, because by that time, this is about 2/3 in, I was like, half of the book, like, this is nonsense. And then I finally latched onto something that I'm able to understand, and boom, he's making fun of the first half of the book. And I remember being like, wow, he's talking to me.
I mean, look, I don't think he was making fun of the book necessarily. I think that it could be that, and it may well have been. It would speak of him highly, because like that's a really cool move if you think about it, like that being like that like self-aware, I guess.
The fourth wall, but like satirically.
He also brings in some history because what is it, Masio? Their like butler joins the Black Muslims at one point. He goes off. No one really talks about it. He just comes back at some point. No one ever talks about it. They're like, okay.
Yeah.
Do you think it's making fun of like black people turning Muslim in prison?
No, I think he's just making fun of like how the world keeps turning around them. These major political, like the world is like changing, big things are happening, and while they're in there, they're just like in this decrepit house falling apart.
Like,
well, I mean, this book, Marina, you made a really good point last time why this book is actually a feminist book. Because
the women are the ones who are like, Well, Fanny is, I think, the strongest character, right, out of everyone. She ends up in like the highest level position. She supported Jimmerson, she supported her son, she supported the head. She like paying tons and tons of money just to look after them.
So why is that feminist?
Because
she's a strong woman character, female character.
It's a strong female character without trying to make a strong female character. I think that's the funny part. It's like she's sort of around, and like you're focusing on these guys, and meanwhile they're like, "You woman, you do not understand this. You cannot be part of this. We're sorry." And she's like, "Okay, honey, like I'm gonna go get a job." And there's
to support you and your boys doing nothing. Yeah,
while you guys do nothing, there's a point where literally, it says in the beginning where like Jimmerson like stopped working completely. He started focusing on his research, and so she ended up getting a job. Yeah, and he didn't even notice. He didn't notice that he started eating better, that they were no longer like living in a crappy place, and he didn't care that she even worked because like he didn't even notice that she was working.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. And just a bunch of dudes failing at life.
But imagine the mental, like this is kind of the horror, right? We're approaching Halloween. The horror of this book, and this is kind of just hit me like thinking about this. Yeah. The horror of this book is that these guys, like Jimmerson, I'm not Popper. I think you guys are completely right. He was high on his own supply, but he was all about Popper. Like he was right, and he was grifting, but he kind of grifted himself, kind of.
Sure.
And then came back because nobody else would have him. But he also was living with women, the leftist women who like fed him and shit.
Oh my god, that was such a funny scene.
So he comes back, but like the horror is that. Do you remember the part when Jimmerson kind of like Popper comes back and like makes him run for governor?
Yeah.
When the book happens, when like the Hoosier Wizard happens, and all that nonsense, he comes back. And he's just like walking around. Lamar is walking around and just like, oh, I'm looking things up. Like this is a man who like is not in touch with reality, right? He's been indoors for the last God knows how many years, and like the whole time he's going to like the rally with the lawyers, he's asking about his lunch, right? This is not. It's like a nursing home scene. You know what I mean? He should be, and I think it's like imagine the horror of being locked in that mental prison, like believing that you are like, yeah, I'm gonna fucking put on my poma and like my robe and shit. And I'm going to go out in front of these lawyers and I'm going to give them a political speech. Do you remember how he was like struggling, being like, yeah, I should vote. I should run for governor. Shit. Like, I can do it. Like, imagine. It's like such horror, like believing that you, like, oh God. It's like being completely overwhelmed by like one's own ego.
And it's real. I think that's the part that's so funny is that like you could find these people, and I think actually I feel like this kind of exists in everybody. I think that's the part that's funny to me is that like I think we all like to think that we're not gullible or that we can't be sold or that we can't fall for an ideology when stuff, but like we can, and humans have done really stupid shit. And I feel like that's what the book kind of is so good at highlighting. Like there's another part where like Sidney Hen goes down to Mexico, and you know when he starts his own grift of like his retreat, where he charges at $1,200 for like people to go there, and like there's a point where it says he bleeds these people, he bleeds them by the quart, and like he like does his sermons with like a flute or something, and the guy doesn't even play the flute. I don't know what instrument it is, but it's just like people do this shit. They do this stuff.
In a way, this book could be like a vaccine against cults.
I think in a classroom discussion, certainly. So I when Ilya was talking about how like this should be taught in schools, I feel like there's a place for a book like this in schools because it brings up interesting conversations about how do people fall into this? How does someone develop such a strong belief? And it's not surprising that like the heyday of this organization happened during the Great Depression, that when people really needed to hold on to something, that was when they really flourished. And when World War II started and everyone's like, well, crap, we have bigger things to worry about, was when it was dying down. That plus, you know, like post-World War II, the U.S. economy was booming. So
right.
Here's the thing, is that like with this Gnomonism, the reason why this book was funny is because it took the lighthearted side of cults. You know, the cults that we think about, like, I don't know, Scientology, for example, where it's like they're literally taking people's livelihoods in terms of how much money they're taking. But in this case, it wasn't like they were completely robbing people blind. It's not like people were losing by being part of this cult so much, you know, part of this like
right.
or secret society, whatever. These people just wanted to belong and like feel self-important, and they got something out of it. And most people were unharmed, besides the people that were like bled and stuff
By the court.
by the court. And, the fact that Jerome grew up without a father. But like besides that, everyone is fine. So I'm saying it's like it's kind of the people that you could just laugh at without necessarily being like, oh, these are dangerous. This is a harmless cult.
I guess the only way one could see how it could become dangerous, and the way that it would become dangerous, is if many people were like, holy shit, look at this, look at the Jimmerson spiral. This is genius. And the only thing that prevented it from being like that is the fact that it was junk, and unreadable junk to boot. Because it was, you know what I mean? It was designed to keep out perfect strangers and stuff.
So I guess once again, how do you vaccinate yourself against being part of a cult?
I don't think you can.
Check your own bullshit as much as possible.
I think it has to be ego death. I think that's the only thing that would save a person.
Dang, that's a high. I mean, for sure. I just think it's unachievable.
I think education first and foremost. I think if you learn about cults in nonfiction form, and then you learn about it even through fiction form like this, I think that's a good place to start. I think second maybe is don't venerate anybody.
I agree. Even your own mind. You can't.
Trust nobody.
Exactly. No gods, no masters.
Well, that's the problem, is like you can't swing too much to that side. Because are there good systems of beliefs?
Can we adjourn this to another time? This is a deep conversation that I cannot have
In this state of mind.
in the reasonable time allotted, I guess.
Okay.
All right. Well, good talk.
Yes. Excellent. Good stuff.